Welcome to the Impactus podcast, episode 15, where we equip you as a man for a life of purpose and godly impact. Today, our guest is Mark Clark. Mark is the founding pastor of Village Church, a multi-site church with locations in Canada, all across Canada, and online around the world. And they focus really on reaching skeptics, challenging Christians. Mark is the author of The Problem of God, a great book that I highly recommend to you. Winner of the 2018 Word Award for Evangelism. And he's also just released a brand new book called The Problem of Jesus, that we're going to talk about today. But Mark resides in Vancouver with his wife, easy for me to say, with his wife, Erin.
Hopefully.
And their 3 daughters. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, sir. Thank you.
So we're recording this when Canada is under the worst set of cold that we've experienced in years. It's minus 25 in Ontario, where I am. You're in Vancouver. Are the flowers out yet?
I was golfing 2 days ago, Kirk. So I don't know what the problem is.
Yeah, you see, nothing like making a brother stumble right off the top.
No, it's cold here too. We had to cancel our golf game for the week, Kirk.
Cold in Vancouver is relative. Yeah. That's a relative term. Cold.
It's very true, but it does rain, and I'm from Ontario originally, so I miss seeing the sun from November till April.
Okay, that's true.
So there is a trade. There is a trade-off.
I do agree.
It rains a lot. So anyway,
you're right. So Mark, you decided to tackle the topic of Jesus, which is, just a small thing to do. Somehow you managed to try to do it in 300 pages or so. So I'm just curious, what on earth made you decide to write this book?
Yeah, I think it's probably twice as long as the original idea from Zondervan. They like kind of shorter books because people read those quicker. And so I did my best. And, but I think obviously every chapter matters, every sentence matters, because we're talking about the most important thing we could talk about. Jesus is obviously, I talked about the idea that, what you do with Jesus is the most important question in your life. And it's Jesus is what people do with Jesus defines the fate of everyone who's ever lived. And so it's kind of this question of, I grew up as a skeptic. I didn't grow up. First time I walked into a church, I was 19, and like probably some of the men watching this, the only reason I stayed, they weren't like always godly reasons, and so, there was girls around, and there was, this. So it was like, okay, I didn't grow up prayer, Bible, church, anything. So I, was kind of, given the idea of Jesus, in high school, and then I investigated him because I'm kind of a skeptical thinker, evidential thinker. And I wanted to go, if I'm going to become a Christian, I wanted to have legitimacy in the realm of philosophy and history and literature and all these kind of things. So I started exploring. So the book was kind of born out of, okay, I want the skeptic, questions to be answered. In regard to, I meet people in the post-Christian culture that we live in, and it's like, did Jesus exist? I don't trust the Gospels. They're made up story, all this kind of stuff. So I answered those. You have a chapter on the existence of Jesus. And then not only did he exist, we have 10 or 12 people outside of the Bible that actually talk about Jesus that were enemies of Christianity, or at least not friends of it, that say, hey, this guy existed, he did miracles, Pontius Pilate killed him, his belief, all these kind of things totally outside the Bible. And then not only did he exist, but what was he really about? Like, does Christianity actually have, the person and the work of Jesus figured out? Is he just about forgiving people? If you go into the message of Jesus over and over, you find out, oh, actually, he was about this thing called the kingdom of God, and he was constantly talking about it. And why don't I think about that more often, seeming it was kind of his main thing, So I talk about that a lot, and then I talk about how the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, how they all work and what their theological angle is and why they represent Jesus, this or that. And then, we get into loving God, discipleship, the cost of discipleship, what it means to follow Jesus in the real world. Jesus claimed to be God. How the parables aren't just like these nice stories. They're actually upending everybody's worldview and everything we thought about God and salvation and ourselves and all these things. So, what I wanted to try to do was how can I help the skeptic move along, but also inform, inspire, the already follower of Jesus. So it's got both audiences in mind as it explores all of these, bigger themes.
So let's talk first about the skeptic thing and people who are skeptical about Jesus. One of the things that I find a lot of people are kind of coming to the place of, okay, Jesus was a real historical figure. I can buy into that.
Sure.
But even if there was a historical person named Jesus, there's like a lot of people who question things like, there's no way this guy walked on water. There's no way,
Right.
He raised the dead to life. All these miracles that I read in the Bible, there's just no way that stuff actually happens. So what do you say to someone who just can't believe in the miracles of Jesus?
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of the longer chapters in the book, actually, dealing with miracles. And the first thing I do is go, before I kind of follow the line of C.S. Lewis, in his book on miracles, where it was like, before I do a chapter on, or a section on the miracles of Jesus themselves, and what they were and what they meant, let's kind of clear away the philosophical and the scientific and the historical problem of miracles and realize that the modern version of what you just said actually doesn't fit with the scientific conclusions that we're now finding. What Alvin Plantinga calls, like, you have the old traditional version of science, right? The stuff that came out of 200 years ago, Enlightenment, where you put everything through the scientific method of hypothesis and, verification and all this. And that's a very naturalist. It's birthed out of a naturalist worldview, right? You're looking at soil and you're deducing things about soil. But of course, there's a limit when you're doing the work of physics. It's very hard to adjudicate the question of metaphysics. Mm-hmm. To answer the question of God, to answer the question of spirituality, whether there's something out, and I actually start that chapter in the whole book by telling the story about a demon in my house and how there was I was kind of going through this season where I was waking up at 2 a.m. and walking around my house, convinced there was a presence there, like every single night. And I'd be working in my office and just felt like, and this had never happened. We had just moved into this house and we were renting it. And then all these, like, I was downstairs watching TV and a chair dragged along my ceiling. And I said, "Hey, Aaron," kind of yelled up to her, and she was right behind me. She's like, "What?" And I'm like, I ran upstairs. All the kids are saying, there's the chair, like all this crazy stuff. And I started to be like, kind of freaking out a little bit, like, what is actually happening? So I get in this, I jump in a plane and I fly to Toronto, and I'm speaking at a conference. And I meet with this pastor that I've never talked to in my life. He doesn't know anything about me. I don't know anything about him. We sit down for coffee at a Starbucks, and we have this conversation about leadership and ministry and whatever. And all of a sudden he looks at me and he goes, "What's wrong with your house?" And I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "You're having questions about your house, aren't you?" I'm like, "What are you talking about right now?" And then he starts to like sneeze. And I'm like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm having a reaction to a spiritual dynamic in your house." And I'm like, "What?" And he grabs a sheet of paper and he starts drawing my house like he drew the blueprint himself. He's like, "This is your office. This is your bedroom. This is your closet." I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "That's where they are." I'm like, "Where what is?" And he's like, "Demons. They were invited there and they're territorial and they don't like that you're there." And I'm like, what is happening right now? I've never mentioned my house to this guy. I've never mentioned anything. And this guy discerns this thing. It's crazy. So I kind of take it from there and go, look, there seems to be, people have had experiences across the globe. Craig Keener's book on miracles is, 500 pages of, let's explore 250 million miracles from all 7 continents that scientists and medical doctors have gone to. And even if, my point is, even if one of those stories is true, all of naturalism falls apart. There really is something behind the veil. There really is something beyond physics. There's something beyond the natural world. And Plantinga points out, like, the old science doesn't really have a spot for that. So we're like, okay, it's naturalism. It's, this is the whole show. And of course, as other philosophers have pointed out, well, you can't deduce something about this when you're only looking at this. All you're going to deduce is how this works. But he points out that in the new science, when you're getting into the realm of quantum mechanics and black holes and dark matter, and that the universe is far more complex today than we knew it was 200 years ago. Darwin was poking around with bird wings and trying to figure out stuff. And now we're in like DNA cells and figuring out how, all this fifth dimensions work. So point being, most scientists, philosophers, if they recognize I don't have to philosophically be a naturalist is kind of a philosophical decision, not a scientific one necessarily, then they'll realize miracles actually fit into the realm of quantum mechanics and new science that we're learning. And of course, science isn't like, or miracles aren't like a violation of natural laws, as I talk about in the book, because we actually don't know what all the natural laws are. We used to think what the natural laws were, but those things are being rewritten.
Right.
It's like, oh, we thought this and we thought that, but that doesn't work. And actually, Einstein kind of rethought Newton, and Newton's laws were like proven every day for thousands of years. Now it's like, we got to, redo that hundreds of years. So, miracles aren't this kind of violation. They're an interruption. If I catch an apple falling from a tree, it's not a violation of gravity. It's an interruption. And miracles are this beautiful picture of God interrupting a system that he's actually part of. And then of course the rest of the chapter is about what do they mean then? Jesus probably did 32. It's actually interesting. When I was researching the book, I realized there's only 32 separately recorded miracles. I don't know if we ever really think about this. It kind of blew me away because I kind of just compile them all together and move on. And in my brain, I'm like, there's hundreds, but there's 32. And now, of course, John tells us he did a lot more stuff that I'm not telling you, but 32 recorded ones. And that's kind of like if you give them 3 years of ministry, it's 10 a year. It's like an interesting way to think of it.
One a month.
Yes, one a month. He's doing one a month. So what are they? So he's not, his main play, the point of that is not, hey, watch me float. Now believe what I'm about to say. He doesn't do that. He could have done that. Of course, that's the temptation Satan gives him in the wilderness, right? Jump off the temple, float around, fly around. Everyone's going to be like, Superman, I want to follow. And he doesn't do that. And I talk about part of the reason for that, and this is where I get into the kind of the last section of the miracles chapter is miracles are about our transformation. And the reason Jesus doesn't want to base all of our faith on miracles is because, what I point out is, he knows something that we kind of know, but we're not willing to admit, which is oftentimes the solution to our problem is not deliverance, but discipleship. Mm-hmm. The porn addiction doesn't go away because you showed up to a meeting one day and a guy said, do this, and it was over. It's the long work in the dark when nobody's looking. The shopping addiction doesn't go away because you walked into miracles always have this kind of backsided question of why not me?
Yep.
He's not doing it in my life. Why not that, that loved one passed away. And so we realize that kind of water and wine, it's about the transformation of our kind of dead lives into colorful, meaningful, beautiful, sweet, savory lives. He's about the transformation of us. And that's what these things are about. And what, of course, we find in the one behind the miracles. So that's.
Yeah, no, I love that chapter. I think that just the insight around it, I think would be so helpful for people who are wrestling with those kinds of questions. One of the things I've noticed about Jesus is he's really good at kind of offending everybody, and especially religious people. What is it about his teachings, his stories that you think have offended so many religious people?
Yeah, I mean, religious people tend to, when he tells stories about, prodigal son, which I do, in the parables chapter, I talk about how it's not about one lost son, it's about two. One is the, secular, irreligious, liberal guy who's all out doing whatever, sleeping with prostitutes, spending the money, blah, blah, and, comes to the end of himself and realizes he's all wrong and comes back to the Father, and the Father celebrates him. And then we stop preaching. And we forget, that there's this other son in the story, the religious son, who he says in the story, I've never disobeyed you. I pay attention to all your rules. Basically, I read the Bible every day. I go to church. I'm a good guy. And the scandal of that story is he never comes into the party. He never gets the celebration. He never comes into the kingdom. His self-righteousness leaves him out because he's there's basically two ways of looking at everything. It's either you're going to put Jesus' record on the table when you stand before God on Judgment Day, or you're going to put your own record on the table, and I'm going to vie for the first one because mine's a disaster. If you look to yourself, and then what happens is religious people then, because they trust in themselves and their own moral righteousness, of course, the whole world becomes a scale of, are you better or worse than what my values and my expectations of human beings are? And when you start to play that game, it starts to ruin your soul because you start to demonize people. Mm-hmm. And why Jesus scandalizes you is because he refuses to do that. For instance, he says crazy stuff we never preach, right? Stuff like, hey guys, in the kingdom, speaking to Pharisees, prostitutes are going to get ahead of you. we read that and we're like, he's just kind of being metaphorical. And it's like, no. Like if there's a train up to heaven, when it's all over, there's going to be prostitutes and drug dealers who trusted Christ and yet their life was not perfect. And way back here, there's going to be pastors and bloggers and preachers, It's like, that's why religious people get offended.
Yeah.
Because it upends everything because, you read Matthew 20, where the guy shows up at 8:00 to work the field and Jesus says, hey, I'm going to pay you this. And then he hires the guy at 3 p.m. and he only works an hour and he gives him the same as he gave the guy who showed up at 8, and all our capitalist brains explode. We're like, Jesus, this is terrible capitalism, and he's like, yeah, but these are the mathematics of grace. Is people who come in late get the same thing as the people who come in early. And what's the problem? And religious people can't handle it. So I think he's constantly overthrowing, the religious spirit.
Yeah, it's true. One of the things that's surprised me when I first started traveling to other parts of the world was people who would look at America or North America and say, man, that's a Christian country. And then they would look at movies that come out of Hollywood and say, see, that's what Christians produce, is that kind of stuff. And there is this, even within the Christian community, Christian subculture in North America, there's this Americanized version of Jesus that we've created. Where on earth did we ever get this version of Jesus?
Well, that's going to be a long one, but I'll try to, it's so multifaceted, but I think the closest thing to that I talk about is the chapter on discipleship, where I talk about the idols of family and comfort and how Jesus calls us out of those idols. We have, there's certain sins that become very popular in the Christian world that we call people out of, and most of them are sexual. And we say, these are the big ones. These are, but of course, you read Luke 9 and there's these constant like, hey, I want to follow you, but I got to go bury my dad. And Jesus is like, yeah, you can't really do that. And the whole point of it is this, like, when you start to idolize even good things, not just money, sex, power, but family and your own security and your own comfort and the American or Canadian dream or the Western dream, when you start to accept those into your heart, in a sense, and look for joy and meaning in life through those things, or through beauty, or through your marriage. Mm-hmm. If your only source of joy and meaning in life is from your spouse, all of this will crush you because they will let you down. Your beauty will go away. Your reputation will get, if you're, as guys it's like reputation's a big deal, right? Like, I want to be seen as a, whatever. And it's like, if that's your form of salvation,
yeah,
it will let you down because someone will talk about you behind your back. You'll get crushed by it, and so I think that version of Christianity, to come back to your question, comes out of us prioritizing, say, comfort. And so it's like, okay, when Jesus gives a paradigm, 269 times the word disciple is used in the New Testament. 3 times the word Christian is used. So that disciple, follower, learner of Jesus as Lord, teacher, treasure is the paradigm of Christianity. Well, that means that if the only difference between you and your neighbor is that you believe different things about Jesus, you have a different, Christology, you believe he's God, but you still watch Netflix, do sexuality, spend your money the same. What is that? Like, that's not the version of Christianity Jesus puts forward. And so we tend to go, how do I become a Christianized version of what the culture is and what I'm determined to remain? And then we end up exporting that version of Christianity to the world, these cultural priorities of comfort. I got the 2 kids and the white picket fence and the 2 SUVs and the beautiful house. And when God shows up, as he did to a guy in my church one day, and woke him up at 2 a.m. and said, I want you to pull your kids out of school, sell your beautiful house in Vancouver, and go to a third world country and serve the poor and the widows. And he just did it. Mm-hmm. What do you think every single person who loved him the most told him? Don't go.
Right.
You're crazy. This is stupid. What are you doing? What is that? That's a prioritization of comfort over gospel.
Yeah.
Can we even hear the voice of Jesus anymore when he calls us to radical things out of the place of comfort and family and, all of that? So I think that's why we tend to export that version of Christianity to the world, and why, it becomes pretty weak over time.
Yeah, it does. And in this world of discipleship, one of the things that really hit me was you talk about the 10,000 hour rule. And that really struck me as something significant for Christians to think about and consider, and think about how this applies to our life. So describe the rule real quick, and how does it impact our lives when it comes to following Jesus?
Yeah. So 10,000 hour rule comes out of different psychological studies. I was first exposed to it by reading Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers. And he talks about basically trying to blow away the myth of people are born special. And, the reason Bill Gates is who he is, the reason the Beatles are who they are, the reason Mozart and Beethoven were who they were, is just they were born special. And for the rest of us, that's kind of a useless principle. It's like, well, I wasn't born special, And so there's been all these psychological studies on actually, and of course, it's a bit of nurture and nature both, because, I'm sure if I spent 10,000 hours just trying to write great music, I wouldn't be Beethoven. But every time psychologists have gone and studied, masters, people who master something, right? It's people who they're just the world class. What they found was no one in any version of that, athlete, music, whatever, did that without at least 10,000 hours of practice, like just doing that thing for 10,000 hours. And so I talk about the idea that I was talking about that one day. And basically it's the version of grace is opposed to earning, but it's not opposed to effort. It's like, you can't earn your salvation, but it doesn't mean you stop grinding it. I mean, Jesus says this is what following me is about. So someone kind of pointed out to me one day when I was preaching about that concept that you actually have to put time into this, not just like raise your hand at a summer camp and then move on with your life. Like, this is the daily. They said, 10,000 hours basically equated to 3.5 years of a full-time job, taking Sabbath. And this is literally what Jesus did with the disciples. And so he doesn't just, he doesn't go, okay, I'm going to invent Christianity. Let me just, go away, write a systematic theology, bring it down a mountain, go, here, guys, here's what to believe. And then he disappears. That would take him, a month. He spends 3.5 years with these guys because he wants them to be masters. He wants their life and their theology to be shaped after him. And, for us, it's like, the way, and I think this is really important for the modern conversation, evangelical Christianity has tended to focus on beliefs as the way to change. So if if you guys if you're watching this and you're like, there's certain things I want to change about my life. And we all have that, right? Mm-hmm. What the message of Christianity has tended to be is like, believe some stuff, believe this, I'm going to get you doctrinally set. And then, you can change over time. But the problem, and if you guys want to read, the best book I've read on this is James K. Smith's book, You Are What You Love, where he talks about the concept of we don't actually change from the top down. Cognitive ideas, don't tend to shape, because what you're really after is, if you want transformation in your life, what you're really after is not changing what you do. It's changing what you want to do. Mm-hmm. So how do you get at changing what you want to do, changing at what you take pleasure in? Well, that actually starts with habits and practices that start to shape your very affections. It's not just beliefs. And so it's hard to, Thomas Chalmers talks about the idea, and I talk about this in one of the chapters, that you can't just displace an idol. You actually have to replace an idol, because it's not good enough to run away from a habit or a sin. You have to love something more than you love that. So I give the illustration of, I used to smoke. I smoked for 10 years. I love smoking. I love it. And like first cigarette in the morning after a steak, like it's just good stuff. So the only, and so I would go in to buy a pack of cigarettes, and there'd be these pictures on it, like teeth rotting and brains all bleeding, that did nothing. It worked on my external warning mechanism of my psychology, but I just go, give me 2 donkey teeth and a bleeding brain. I didn't care. The only thing that made me stop smoking was I fell in love with a girl, and the girl, who's my wife, didn't love smoking, didn't like the smell of it, didn't like so I had a love that trumped this love, and over time I was able to stop. So the only way we can change our affections for something is through habit. So it's like, I want to begin running. Well, when you wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning that first time, life sucks. You hate running. You don't like anything about it. But 3 months later, because there's been reward centers, dopamine, and different things being released to give you stimulants, and you feel better about life, right? Your brain you feel like I'm getting fit. I'm legit. I'm strong. I'm the man, that actually starts to you actually start to like it. You almost start to get addicted to the reward of the running. And so, point being, we need to kind of figure out how to make these habits in our life, whether that's, following Jesus in a particular way, the scripture, study, prayer, fasting, whatever, begin to shape worship, begin to shape our very affections. And that's how we're going to change and put in that 10,000 hours and be real followers of Jesus.
Yeah. That's amazing. I love that principle. I think it showed me just how much we think following Jesus is my 1 hour Sunday morning, my 10 minutes of devotions every day, and I'm a great follower of Jesus. But just the discipline of 10,000 hours over time, right? It's extraordinary when you stop and think about it. Hey, Mark, we're out of time, but just tell our viewers and our listeners where they can get a copy of the book or where they can connect with you.
Yeah, theproblemofjesus.com, or just jump right to Amazon, but the website will shoot you to Amazon. But it gives a little more detail and shows you what it's about. And then Instagram and Facebook, I'm on there. I usually putting out content for people. And then, of course, the Village Church website, all my sermons are up there from 6 years of me, teaching the Bible and whatever. So whatever they can get out of that, whatever would help them. So
awesome. Good stuff. Thank you, Mark.
Awesome.
Appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. God bless you guys.
Thanks for listening to the Impactus podcast. To learn more about living a life of purpose and godly impact, check out impactus.org.